What are you doing?
I'm making a knot, which I just make a knot, not like a square knot. Other people make rolled knots or
Some other sort.
whatever, but I like this kind of knot. I'm going to start with two types of stitches. First running stitch and then whip or hem stitch, which we'll then put together to do all of the seams and seam finishing and hemming that we need to do. So first of all, we're going to do the running stitch. And there are two ways to do it. The first one is the stab, and this means you take your needle and you stab it through the two pieces that you're attaching together. You pull your thread through, and then you stab it again, coming back up, and you pull your thread through, and you stab again on the way down. And this is good for very thick and heavy fabrics. It's also good for places where you need to be extremely precise. However, it's a little slow. So if you have a thinner fabric, you should try the gather. And the gather means you're going to gather a bunch of stitches up onto your needle and then pull through all of these stitches at once, like so. So I just made 4 stitches in a very short period of time. And then we can continue with the gather, which is obviously a faster method of sewing. Okay, this is the second stitch that you need for medieval hand sewing, and that is the whip or hem stitch. We're doing it over a raw edge right now, which is the cut edge of the fabric. So again, you need to knot your thread off, and then we're going to take a little scoop underneath and pull
Can you
through.
lay the whole thing flat for a second to see what it looks like? So there's 2 raw edges there that you're joining together?
No, this is just a single one. This is
Okay.
as though I were hemming something.
Okay.
So this is just to show how whip stitch works.
Okay. So you're just rolling over a raw edge and whipping it down.
Yes, this is just rolling over a raw edge and whipping it down, like so.
Alright.
Okay, so now that we've learned what a whip stitch is and what a running stitch is, now we're going to put them together and do some seam finishing. So the trick with seam finishing is you have to decide what seam finishing you are going to do before you start sewing. And I have decided to, so I have 2 favorites, and I'm going to show you both of them. The first one I call uneven, and that's what the one that we're going to do here. And the reason I call it uneven is because you have your 2 raw edges are sitting uneven to each other. So you sew closer to one edge than you sew to the other edge.
Can you hold up, show where the line is where they're joined?
What do you mean? Like
Point,
this?
point your finger at where the 2 different edges are. It's kind of hard to see here.
Okay, so we have the sewing is very, very close to this edge right here, and then it's much farther away from the other raw edge.
Alright.
Okay. We have a new piece of thread, and we've already done our running stitch here. So now we're going to finish this seam with a whip stitch. So we're going to fold over that long piece. We're going to fold it over the short piece. And then if this is a very heavy fold wool that's not going to fray, you can just whip stitch down this raw edge right here. If it is a finer fabric like linen or something that is going to fray, then you need to tuck this edge under so that all of the raw edges are inside. So once we have this tucked under, we're going to start our new thread, which we always start a new thread by knotting off the end. And these knotted off ends can be tucked into your seams later if you want them to be. So we're going to roll this edge under, and you can use pins if you don't feel comfortable holding them in your fingers. I am fine just holding them, so I don't usually use pins at this juncture. But so you roll it underneath, and then we're going to whip stitch down this edge right here. So we take big stitches towards us, and small stitches on the other side, because right now we're sewing on the inside of the garment. So we're finishing our seams here, and these slanted parts will actually hold the edge down really well. And on the other side, you'll just have little pricks, little
You want to
spots.
turn it over and show?
I will show it in just a second. Let me get one more stitch in. Okay, so this is what it looks like on the inside, and then if we turn it over, this is what it looks like on the outside of the garment. And this can be kind of decorative as you go along. Okay, so time to go on to my second most favorite early medieval appropriate seam finishing technique. So we've already gone over my most favorite one, which has several advantages, such as when you try to tear your clothing apart, you have 2 points that hold it in, whereas the second one that we're going to do has less
Structural integrity.
Structural integrity, exactly the word I was looking for. Alright, we're going to set this one aside for a minute. Look at the new one. So this one I call Hearts. I'm sure it has a more official name somewhere, but I remember it by the fact that it makes a heart shape if you look at it from the end. So what you're going to do is you're going to open up the seam that you just sewed with your running stitch, and you're going to fold each one of these in towards the other one, like so, and then you're going to let these sort of stand up towards each other, and they make a little heart shape on the end. Aren't they cute?
And instead of being uneven, you've got basically the same amount of fabric on each side there.
Correct. So this one, if you decide to sew this one, when you do your running stitch, you have the same amount of fabric on both sides, so these edges are even with each other. So after you make the little heart, then you're going to whip stitch along the tops. Again, if you feel the need to pin your whole seam at this juncture, go right ahead. I generally sort of fold as I go, and then whip stitch along the top. And these are fine. I mean, when this seam has torn out on my clothing, it tears out the running stitch, but it doesn't generally tear out the whip stitching, whereas on the other seam, it generally the fabric fails before the thread fails.
And the benefit of this sort of finishing is that then when on the right side of the fabric, you're not going to see any of that whip stitching. It's going to, you want to flip over?
Exactly.
You shouldn't see anything other than if you pull apart that running stitch.
So on this one, right, and
yeah.
if we'd used, so I'm intentionally using a contrasting color so that the stitches will show up, but here you would not see any of that stitching. Whereas on the first one that I did, you're going to have that whole row of little stitches that go along the side of every one of your seams. There are obviously a plethora of other ways that you can finish your seams. Pretty much any way that you can combine a running stitch and a whip stitch where all of the raw edges are enclosed when you're done are acceptable. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of ways of doing a seam finishing. These are my favorites because they're quick and they're sturdy.